From CPRE and the CPRE Knowledge Hub, this is Research Minutes, a weekly look at new and important research in education. Today, we look at online learning and how decades of research can help teachers, families, and students of all ages navigate an unprecedented era in American education.
There is no time for current faculty and teachers in K-12 schools, as well as parents, to really design meaningful online courses or online teaching interactions that are based on instructional design processes or pedagogy of online learning or digital pedagogies. And so that is why everyone's calling this unprecedented lift to online teaching sort of emergency remote learning, if you will.
We welcome George Mason University's Nada Dabbagh, author of the 2019 book Meaningful Online Learning, Integrating Strategies, Activities, and Learning Technologies for Effective Design. Dabbagh joins us to discuss some evidence-based strategies for online teaching and learning.
Because you're online, time changes. When you design curricula, you need to space the content differently. You might stagger some of your assignments to make sure that they're not all coming at the same time. You want to stagger teamwork. You want to make sure that the groups that the students are working with are manageable.
And some practical tips for instructors and families trying to maintain a quality educational experience outside of the classroom.
I would ask the parents to organize the day in between studying and, helping in the house, and also going outdoors if possible, and maybe doing some exercise and taking downtime for yourself. So it takes a village, to be able to keep a daily routine so that you can engage in these learning opportunities in a meaningful way.
That's right now on Research Minutes. Hello and welcome to Research Minutes. I'm Keith Humeller, Managing Editor of the CPRE Knowledge Hub. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Nada Dabbagh, Professor and Director of the Division of Learning Technologies in the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University. She's also the author of the 2019 book Meaningful Online Learning, Integrating Strategies, Activities, and Learning Technologies for Effective Designs. Thanks so much for joining us, Nada. Thanks,
Keith. Thanks for having me.
So we are, without question, living in an unprecedented moment in American education. Currently, as we're speaking, more than 100,000 public schools across the country have closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in many cases, they will remain closed for at least the remainder of the school year. Millions of students and their teachers are now engaged in online learning, and a significant portion of them may have little to no experience doing so. So, needless to say, there's a lot of questions right now, but I'd like to start more generally if we can. In your experience, is there a significant difference between teaching online and teaching in person? And how would you suggest that instructors think about and approach that difference?
Sure, absolutely. The key word that you just said, Keith, is significant. There is definitely a significant difference between teaching face-to-face and teaching online, and designing face-to-face courses or curricula versus designing online courses and curricula. But I do want to start first by saying that these are unprecedented times, as you had mentioned, and we are not really moving to online learning in a meaningful way, meaning there is no time for current faculty and teachers in K-12 schools, as well as parents, to really design meaningful online courses or online teaching interactions that are based on instructional design processes or pedagogy of online learning or digital pedagogies because there's simply not enough time to do this. And so that is why everyone's calling this unprecedented lift to online teaching, sort of emergency remote learning, if you will. So I just want to emphasize that what we're in is sort of a makeshift or an ad hoc way of transitioning all of our face-to-face interactions and face-to-face instruction to an online or digital format. Now, having said that, there's definitely a significant difference between face-to-face and online teaching. And I would say there are 4 maybe principles that are significantly different. First of all, time is a big issue or big difference between face-to-face and online teaching. In general, the research has showed or demonstrated that online teaching takes a lot of time, a lot more time than face-to-face teaching because of the need to be more proactive, provide consistent feedback to students, and provide one-on-one feedback to students, as opposed to when you're in a face-to-face setting, you can generally give feedback in a more broad way, addressing the entire class at the same time. Where when you move online, this totally changes. Also, in order to have engaging online interactions or an online environment, a lot more has to take place than in face-to-face. It's very difficult online to also assess the cues of your students, how they're looking, whether they're really understanding the content, what is their engagement level, and therefore these social cues are absent, particularly in asynchronous online teaching environments, and even in synchronous when you're able to see your students in a video conferencing platform. It's also difficult to assess whether they're engaged or not. That is another, significant difference between face-to-face and online. And then finally, there's also the issue of persistence and completion rates in online learning environments. The research has also told us that many students have difficulty completing online learning assignments or interactions, and that's because a lot more self-regulated learning is required, and we don't teach our students enough how to be self-regulated and how to organize their time, manage their time, plan their assignments, when to start, when to seek assistance from peers, from the instructor. So this is also another huge, significant difference between face-to-face and online learning, is that it takes a lot out of our students to be able to persist in the course and stay engaged and complete their assignments. So I would say the time, the quality of the class to make it engaging and effective, the issue of completion and persistence, enabling our students to be more self-regulated, and the design or development of online learning courses. All these 4 principles definitely make online teaching very different from face-to-face.
One of the more common questions that we've seen lately relates to synchronous versus asynchronous content. That is, using live instruction versus pre-recorded or pre-designed instructional materials, and how to balance the two. What have you learned, either in your work or in the literature, about the effectiveness of those approaches, and what suggestions would you have for teachers trying to leverage them with today's students?
So synchronicity, synchronous versus asynchronous. My suggestion would be to have a blend of both, and that would depend on what you're trying to achieve in your class. It will also depend on who your learners are. For example, adult learners who work full-time, who have to take care of kids, who are parenting, and trying to juggle many things at the same time. I would suggest asynchronous interactions would be the most useful for this population, for this learning population, because they like to do things at their own time, perhaps later in the evening after their kids have gone to sleep or during lunch breaks or different times during the day. So asynchronous learning or communication is most useful for adult learners. However, if you're teaching more younger learners, then they would benefit from seeing you on a video platform as a teacher, the ability for them to be able to raise their hand, for example, virtually. As we know, a lot of the platforms that we use to support online learning have this feature where students are able to click on something showing that they have a question, or they may even be on a video themselves where they can make a motion that they would like to ask a question. So it depends on your learners, their age groups, and it also depends on the learning activity that you are designing for your course. So, for example, if your pedagogy, let's say, is collaborative and you want to engage your students in teamwork, and so that would be a great opportunity to do synchronous, because many of the platforms that we use right now for online teaching allow something called breakout rooms or breakout groups. And you could be, for example, providing a lecture and your students are seeing you online. They're seeing your gestures. You may even be using a whiteboard to do some modeling. If you're teaching math, you might be modeling how you're working through an equation. What we say is worked examples in front of them, and they'd be seeing that. And so that gives them the opportunity to also interrupt you in a positive way and ask questions if you let them know that they're able to do that, or post something in a chat box that they have a question, and then you can click stop your lecture or stop your modeling example and listen to their question and provide an answer. And you can also then break them out into virtual rooms and tell them, okay, now I would like to give you this math problem to work out, or this assignment to work in a team of 5. And they will be able to also virtually, synchronously, at the same time, live, interact with each other, come up with a solution, perhaps even type in some of these solutions into say, Google Slides, because it's open and free, and they could then share it and come back and share it with the instructor and with the entire class. Of course, this is assuming that your class is reasonably not too large, medium size. I mean, if you had 100 students at a higher education institution level, then it would take a lot of effort and know-how to have 10 breakout rooms and then manage all that from a time perspective. But if you had a class of 40 to 50 students, that could be done more easily. So again, synchronous is more impactful in the immediate sense. It really gives your students a sense of social presence. They feel that they are with others in this virtual space and not sort of working on their own. The asynchronous, you could have asynchronous discussions, let's say, and we do that a lot in higher ed. We engage our students in a lot of threaded asynchronous discussions. And you also need to consider your learner profiles, their age group, and of course, the learning activity that you're doing in your class. So I would say these would help you make a decision when to do synchronous versus asynchronous. In this very challenging time, though, I would probably, if you're teaching in higher ed, I would encourage the asynchronous approach for sure. If you're teaching younger children, perhaps having a 1-hour synchronous lesson with them during the day would help them stay more on track and feel that they're engaged.
In terms of curriculum, many might be wondering about presentation and time on task. In your work, have you found that material should be presented online in relatively the same way and for the same duration as in-person instruction? Or does research suggest that there are changes teachers should consider in designing a distance learning approach?
Absolutely. For entire curricular designs, as well as programs and courses, there is a different way of arranging the materials of the course or the content of the course, if you will. Because you're online, time changes, everything changes, the pace changes, the time changes. So, for example, when students are used to going to a class Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 1.5 hours each time, or if they're graduate students, are probably going in face-to-face for 1 day a week for 3.5 hours. If they're K to 12, they're in school pretty much 5-6 hours for the entire day. So they get there, they're face to face, they have their peers, they have their teachers, you're interacting, the teacher is teaching, you're doing group work with your team, with other peer learners. In online learning environments, it's very different. When you design curricula, you need to space the content differently. So you would perhaps look at it in chunks of days versus weeks, depending on whether you're teaching synchronous or asynchronous. You might stagger some of your assignments to make sure that they're not all coming at the same time, particularly if you're talking about an entire curriculum. You really need to sort of work with the faculty who are teaching this entire curriculum to make sure that the assignments that are being requested in the different classes are not all due at the same time. You want to stagger deadlines or assignment due dates. You want to stagger teamwork. You want to make sure that the groups that the students are working with are manageable. So there are many different things to consider when you're designing online content. Typically in a face-to-face course in a higher education setting, we work by semesters, like 15-week semesters. With online curricula, the trend seems to be, and I don't have research to support why, but the trend seems to be a 3-credit course can easily be achievable in an 8-week time frame, 7.5 to 8-week time frame, providing the students are not taking, 5 courses in the same 8 weeks. Again, I don't have research to support whether it's working better than spanning a whole online course over 15 weeks, but it seems to be the shorter, what we call micro-credentialing types of environments where the students are doing also more self-paced, more self-directed online learning, particularly for the adult student population. That seems to be the trend in terms of curriculum design versus the face-to-face that can actually take much longer.
One of the overriding questions for nearly all Americans right now has been, how do we maintain social interaction and connection in such an isolating time? Are there any research-backed methods or approaches for fostering a sense of community among students in an online setting?
Absolutely. And this is actually one of my favorite areas of research in online learning. So there are a lot of interaction frameworks around. I go back to Moore back in the 80s when he came up with an interaction framework that had sort of 3 types of interaction: learner-content interaction, learner-instructor interaction, and learner-learner interaction. So that was meant for distance learning. At the time, we used to call it distance learning. Now, of course, we refer to this as online learning. This idea of interaction to build a sense of community, social presence, instructor presence, student presence, a sense of inquiry is really, really important in online learning. So there are many types of interactions in the literature, and it has been supported that if you design your online learning courses or curricula using these types of interactions, it will result in a more engaged learner. So it's really important to sort of unpack these interactions based on your course learning outcomes and objectives. What are you trying to get your students to learn? What do you want them to accomplish in the course? And what skills would you like them to achieve? and break that down into the types of interactions. So how do I do learner content interactions? Do I do lectures that are just 5 to 10 minutes and then potentially embed questions in these lectures for the students to engage them so they can be answering questions, sort of taking a mastery learning approach here where the students are able to gauge their understanding by answering questions in your PowerPoint slides or your lectures and getting immediate feedback as to whether they're able to understand the content that you're trying to convey to them. There's also learner-instructor interactions. Those could happen sort of one-on-one office hour meetings virtually with your students, enabling them to ask questions outside of the regular class session, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, but encouraging them to interact with you as a faculty member, with you as a teacher, and be able to, you as a teacher, get a sense of how well they're doing, whether they're struggling with something. You also need to give them an opportunity to interact with other learners and peers in their classes. And this can all be done asynchronously. You can get them matched together to talk with each other in an asynchronous chat, for example, or you could also have them video chat with each other. You can have them use social media or on a Facebook page to help them interact with each other and interact with you as a teacher. And then, of course, there's the learner group interaction. So the learner group would be more sort of when you belong to a community of practice. In the corporate world, we refer to these communities as communities of practice, and they're totally online and they're very virtual. And you can go in as a learner and ask questions and look at best practices of what others are doing in that specific field or practice. But there's also learning communities that students can belong to support this sort of learning group communication. So this whole idea of interaction is really important, and it has been well supported in the literature and well substantiated in the literature that it does. Like these types of interactions, if you go through them, what am I doing for learner content action? What am I doing for learner instructor interaction? What am I doing for learner interaction? What am I doing for learner group interaction? What am I doing for learner coach or mentor tutor interaction, if that's needed? And if you could sort of lay these out, the research has definitely told us that they improve engagement and they definitely improve student learning outcomes.
So in the K-12 sphere in particular, we've seen a significant push in recent years toward more personalized small group instruction in schools. In your experience, is there a way to maintain that sort of intimacy in an online setting, or is that simply an unavoidable loss in a time like this?
In a time when we are rushing to put content online because we want our students to be able to finish the school year in the best way we can, we're doing the best we can. Teachers are doing the best they can to try to finish off the school year for students. I think it will be difficult to maintain this personalized learning, particularly, as you mentioned, if it pertains to putting students in small groups. So that would be the learner group interaction that I referred to earlier. Because in an online setting, you do need a facilitator, you do need the teacher to be able to be there for that small group setting. And if they are able to do it through their learning management system, through breakout rooms, as I had suggested, but I'm not sure that K-12 students in particular, how should I put this, are ready to manage their own small group interactions on their own. I'm afraid, without a teacher being there in the classroom, sort of going around the tables as the students are working on their own in small teams. I think this will be difficult to maintain currently. But as we go forward and as we move forward, I think students will become ready if we train them how to take leading roles, and how to join small learning groups and practice their skills within their peers. So it kind of goes back to this learner-learner or learner-peer interaction, if you will, where you partner with another learner to practice, say, presentation skills or communication skills, or whatever the course that you're taking is enabling you to learn. So I would say this is going to be difficult in the next few months to achieve. However, moving forward is what I'm hoping is that we empower our students at any level, whether in K-12 or whether in higher ed or even professional development. We need to do a better job of empowering our students to kind of create their own learning spaces and be confident in self-regulated learning skills. This is really, really important for pursuing and persisting in digital learning or online learning spaces. So we need to do a better job of helping our students learn organizational skills, study skills, self-regulated learning skills, and more importantly, how to do that also with the types of digital technologies that are available to us. So there are many, I guess, ed tech companies that are coming up with all different types of apps or platforms that support students in enabling them to explore resources on their own, as long as they're curated resources, be able to select resources that they think are going to help them complete an assignment, and then be able to aggregate and document those resources sort of in their own learning space, and then be able to reach out to peers or to communities of practice or learning communities in order to seek help on things or be able to, get a different perspective on what they're trying to learn. So I think this is going to take us time, but eventually we will get there.
One of the more prominent concerns we've heard in recent weeks relates to access and equity, how this monumental shift to online learning will impact those students without access to high-speed internet, tablets, and the like. Is there any indication, either in your work or in prior research, that districts and families are right to be concerned about equity right now? And if so, can you think of anything that might be done to mitigate it?
Sure, absolutely. We have to be concerned about equity. I just heard recently from an internet access perspective in terms of bandwidth, because we're all suffering with bandwidth issues, and this is another reason why synchronous learning is going to be difficult in this time, because synchronous learning requires more bandwidth, particularly if you're using video casting with your students. So there's definitely bandwidth issues. But I did hear a positive thing from EDUCAUSE. EDUCAUSE is our information technology association that's been around for a very long time. So a positive thing came out that there are some internet-based companies that are now waiving data fees for families and maybe even allowing unlimited data by using their phones as a hotspot. So I'm sure you've heard the term hotspot. So if you have a mobile phone and you can turn on the phone, make it as a hotspot to enable you to get on your laptop and use it as providing internet for your laptop or your tablet or your iPad, and then be able to do work or learn there if your internet access is not doing well and not allowing you. Because now a lot of parents and students are at home, and most students, particularly in K-12, are using tablets and even their mobile phones for learning and for checking videos and for interacting with their peers, and they're using all these mobile apps to do that. So what's happening is, yes, there is a whole stress on your network at home. Plus, there are also, I am sure, folks who are living in remote areas that maybe don't even have internet access, and they may be relying mostly on cellular technology. So there is definitely a concern about that. In terms of how are we to address this. This is a difficult question. And that's why I would say don't inundate your students with lectures that are, if the lectures are more audio, the more audio you can use, the lower bandwidth it would be. Try not to use a lot of high fidelity video with your students, and that's why also the asynchronous probably will work better in this difficult time that we're in. So the tech companies are trying to help people, have better access in their homes due to the situation. But in terms of remote learning or online learning, we could also potentially go to a shift. If you remember, in the old days, there was TV. Like you could turn on your TV and listen to a lecture on your TV. There used to be learning through TV. There was also learning through radio. And in many of the, underdeveloped countries, radio is still a way to provide teaching or instructional materials to a family. I doubt whether anyone still has DVDs or CDs, but now it reminds me, these things sort of come into play where you have low tech, low touch types of technologies. For example, the podcast that you're doing with me right now, I would say this is low tech, low touch, and probably most people would be able to access this on their regular phone, even, on their computer, through the audio thing. So we need to be creative about this and see if we can go back to more of a low-tech approach to providing instruction to students at the moment.
Before we wrap up this discussion, I just wanted to ask if you have any other suggestions or best practices that you've learned throughout your career that you think might be useful to teachers or even to families during this obviously trying time.
Again, I teach mostly graduate students in higher education, university setting. I used to teach middle school a long time ago, but many of my students now are at home with their kids, and they are parents, and they're trying to finish their graduate degree. At the same time, they're trying to help their kids stay on track and be organized, and they're all at home. So I find myself, interestingly, mentoring these students in that way, the same as I would do, with my own children. And so what I recommend is to sort of set a daily schedule for yourself and for your kids, and stagger the use of your computers and laptops across your kids. If there's a need to do that and you have low bandwidth, sort of assign different kids different times to sort of do their homework, interact with their teachers in school via video or however their teachers would like them to do that. I've heard many students who are parents inundated on WhatsApp, for example. Many teachers have been trying, and they're trying their best, to post messages to the parents via WhatsApp about what they expect their class to do, what assignments to do. But the parents are getting really weary, and they're getting very frustrated, and they're just not able to manage that. So for teachers, I would say, try to do a one-day email per class, or maybe even every other day. Try to lay out a very well-organized plan of what you expect your students to accomplish, just like we're doing in the higher ed space, and trying to stagger and pace things and not inundate people with, so many emails per day or so many WhatsApp postings per day. And I would ask the parents to, again, organize the day in between studying and, helping in the house, and also going outdoors if possible, and maybe doing some exercise and taking time, downtime for yourself. So it takes a village, to be able to keep a daily routine so that you can engage in these learning opportunities in a meaningful way. That would be my advice.
Nada Dabbagh, once again, is Professor and Director of the Division of Learning Technologies in the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University, and author of the 2019 book, Meaningful Online Learning, Integrating Strategies, Activities, and Learning Technologies for Effective Designs. Thanks so much for joining us today, Nada.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's Research Minutes, presented by the CPRE Knowledge Hub. For more episodes or to subscribe to the series, you can find us at researchminutes.org. To share thoughts on today's episode or to suggest future topics, follow us on Twitter at CPRE Hub. That's CPRE